Today we're looking at LA Rams wide receiver Cooper Kupp to see if we should be buying or selling him in Dynasty. And this video is going to have a little bit different of a format than my previous video on Elijah Mitchell, where instead of going through all the reasons why you should be buying and all the reasons why you should be selling, I'm instead going to be addressing the two main reasons that I see people want to be selling Cooper Kupp in Dynasty and address those as to why I believe that they might not necessarily make sense in selling Cooper Kupp. So one of the biggest reasons to sell Kupp in Dynasty right now is because of his age. He's currently 28 years old and he will turn 29 in June, which in Dynasty wide receiver years is basically the equivalent of being like 60 years old. However, there is still reason to believe that Kupp is in the middle of his NFL prime after his historic season at age 28. Kupp is an amazing slot wide receiver, as we all know. Probably the best the NFL has seen in a while. He doesn't win on speed, size, or extreme athleticism because he's only 6'2" with a 31-inch vertical and runs a 4.62 40-yard dash. By NFL standards, he shouldn't be as good as he is now. However, Cooper Kupp is an amazing route runner and he has an amazingly high football IQ, which pairs extremely well with the role that he is playing in the LA Rams offense, as well as with his rapport with Matthew Stafford. Based on how he wins as a receiver, his career longevity is already longer than a lot of other receivers who win with athleticism that we see fall off around ages 29 or 30. And we have seen wide receivers with that type of longevity be great in the NFL and for fantasy, as recently as what I expect Keenan Allen to continue doing. Adam Thielen, who had nearly 1,000 yards and 14 touchdowns last year at age 30. Larry Fitzgerald, who had 3 straight 100-plus reception, 1,000-yard-plus seasons from ages 32 to 34. Jordy Nelson, who had 2 top 30 fantasy seasons at ages 29 and 31. You got Brandon Marshall, Anquan Bolden, Andre Johnson, Steve Smith. The list goes on, and I would bet that Cooper Kupp follows in all of their footsteps into his early 30s. The next reason people want to sell high on Cooper Kupp now is because of the season that he just had, which makes sense given that he will probably never replicate what he just did with 145 receptions, 1,947 yards, and 16 touchdowns. But in a way, I also think that thinking is kind of backwards. And I get the idea of selling high off amazing production, but just because he had that production doesn't mean he's going to all of a sudden just stop being good, right? Like, did Antonio Brown stop being elite after his 136, 1834, and 10 season in 2015 at age 27? Nope. What about Julio Jones after his 136 for 1871 and 8 season at age 26? No. Just because those receivers never returned to that level of production doesn't mean that they didn't continue being elite. And while obviously Kupp won't have nearly 2,000 yards and over 15 touchdowns again next year, but even if you drop his production by 40% across the board, do you know what that makes him? That makes him Stephon Diggs. That makes him Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans. Literally, if you cut his production by 40% next year based on what he had this year, he is still a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. And in fact, if you cut it by 30%, he is now Jamar Chase and barely behind Justin Jefferson, both of whom were top 5 fantasy receivers. So honestly, ask yourself, is 100 receptions for 12 to 1,300 yards and 9 to 10 touchdowns really that bad of a prediction for 2022 or 2023? I personally don't think it is, especially whenever you consider that Kupp has done that before. He's been a top 5 fantasy receiver before. You might just not remember it, because back in 2019, Cooper Kupp was the wide receiver 4 in fantasy behind Michael Thomas, Chris Godwin, and Julio Jones, and ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. His final stat line that year was 94 receptions, 1,161 yards, and 10 touchdowns, which over 17 games is 100 for nearly 1,250 and 11, right back to that Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs range of production from this year. In 2020, Kupp actually did basically the same thing with 92 receptions, 974 yards, but only 3 touchdowns in 1 fewer game. And he finished as the wide receiver 26, but if you gave him 6 more touchdowns, closer to where he was in 2019 and this past year in 2021, he would have been a borderline wide receiver 1 as the wide receiver 14 and only 2 PPR points behind the wide receiver 11. So those are the two main reasons why people are selling Cooper Kupp right now. And the last thing that I really want to discuss in favor of Kupp is just how stable his situation is compared to a lot of other wide receivers for Dynasty. So when projecting out player stability in Dynasty at the wide receiver position, there are generally 4 things that we tend to look at. Number 1, their contract. 2, their quarterback and that quarterback's contract. And then their team and their offensive system / coaching. And Kupp, as far as we know, is one of the few receivers in the league right now who hits on all 4. Back in 2020, Kupp signed a nice 3-year extension worth $16 million per year. And based on his recent production, he is probably underpaid now. And it's not hard to imagine that the Rams probably want to keep him on their team. As for his quarterback, he's tied to one of the best quarterbacks in the league in Matthew Stafford, who is still only 34 years old, so he has a few years left before he reaches kind of the end of his career. And he is also in a similar contract situation as Kupp, where the Rams are definitely not letting him go anywhere after everything that they gave up to get him, and now a possible Super Bowl ring in year 1. And then finally, he is on one of the best teams in the league and one of the best offenses run by Sean McVay. So none of that is going anywhere for the foreseeable future, making Kupp's situation extremely stable over the next few years, more so than some wide receivers currently ahead of him in Dynasty ADP like Justin Jefferson, possibly CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Devontae Adams, and DK Metcalf. So finally, let's talk his current Dynasty price. Per January ADP, Cooper Kupp is slotted in as the wide receiver 10 in the mid-second round of one quarterback startup ADP, and I don't really view that price rising for February ADP. So while this video has been very pro buying Cooper Kupp in Dynasty, I definitely recognize that there are teams and situations out there where selling Cooper Kupp makes a lot of sense, as long as, to me, the price is right. Too often I see people just advising selling Cooper Kupp, but they don't say for what, and Dynasty managers just take that literally and sell for basically the first offer that they receive, which oftentimes isn't good value for Cooper Kupp. So using the DLF Trade Finder and comments from previous videos on this channel, I have found types of trades where I would be selling and buying Cooper Kupp. So for example, I would be buying Cooper Kupp based on these trades. Number 1, Cooper Kupp for Zach Wilson in the 1 quarterback 1.01. Cooper Kupp and Darrell Henderson for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Terry McLaurin in a 22 second. Cooper Kupp and Michael Thomas for Kadarius Toney. Cooper Kupp, James Conner, and a 2023 first for Deontay Johnson and AJ Dillon. And then there are examples of trades that I would sell Cooper Kupp for, including Cooper Kupp and Adam Thielen for Jamar Chase and a second, Cooper Kupp and Jalen Waddle for a 2023 first and second, and then Cooper Kupp and 2/3 for Michael Pittman, AJ Dillon, and a 23 and 24 first round pick. And then Cooper Kupp for the 105, a 23 first, and Gus Edwards. So basically, to sum this up, if you have Kupp and you're rebuilding, you should be able to get multiple firsts of value for him. If you have Kupp and you're still competing, it would take multiple firsts of known commodities and players, or some sort of wide receiver value upgrade to a Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill or even Justin Jefferson for anything less than basically a first. If you don't have Kupp and you are rebuilding, basically don't worry about buying unless it's like super cheap and you can flip him during the season in 2022. And if you don't have Kupp but you are competing, try to pull off one of those trades that I mentioned in my buy section, using a first and a depth player, or combining 2 young meh kind of players who still have good value and turning them into Cooper Kupp. So I know this buy or sell video had a different format than my previous video, but I will be going back to that format and my list of players that I have from you guys leaving comments down on that video. I had to get this one off my chest because it's been bothering me so much to see people just straight advising to sell Cooper Kupp and giving no additional information on that one. So I wanted to make this video, but I will be returning right back to those other ones. So if you did miss my first video on buying or selling Elijah Mitchell in Dynasty, you can click right up here and watch that video. And with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching. We'll catch y'all later.